Does that work?
I hope so. Welcome to one of my favorite events. Welcome to the 2016 Society for Counseling Psychology Fellow Addresses. I'm just going to share a little bit about the process of how our colleagues are evaluated, and then we'll get very quickly to hearing all the wonderful presentations and stories. I'm Arpana Inman. I am the chair for the Fellows Committee. The primary criteria for the Society of Counseling Psychology Fellows is contribution or performance demonstrating substantial effect on research, policy, practice, training, or social justice. Contributions or performances consistent with and furthering the mission of the Society of Counseling Psychology. Contributions or performances in any area of psychological activity. That's research, practice, advocacy, training, and professional service. The secondary criteria is the receipt of a doctoral degree based in part on a psychological dissertation or from a program primarily psychological in nature and conferred by a graduate school of recognized standing. Prior membership in APA and an SCP member for at least 1 year. Active engagement at time of nomination in the advancement of psychology in any of its aspects. 5 years of acceptable professional experience subsequent to granting of the doctoral degree. There were several folks who were involved in the selection of our distinguished colleagues, and I want to thank all of them. The SCP Fellows Committee, the APA Fellows Committee, and the APA Council. Thank you. So we have two sets of fellows. Initial fellows and current fellows. Initial fellows are those who have applied to being fellow for the first time, and current fellows are those who have already been a fellow in another division and are applying to Division 17 to be fellow. So we have a total of 15 people who became fellow this year. Initial fellows being Bianca Bernstein, Nicole Borges, Jacqueline Gray, Don Nichols, Sherry Rostowski, Patrick Rottinghouse, Michael Shahanasrin, and Joel Wong. The current fellows are Stefania Agasdori, Aisha Sifsi, Keith Herman, Sarah Knox, Rodney Lowman, Aaron Rocklin, and Nathan Grant Smith. Each of these fellows were given an opportunity to either present here today or do a video, or submit their statement to the website. These colleagues have chosen to present here today and grace us with their wonderful talks. I'd like to call on Rodney Lowman.
And the slide up and down is
Yes,
the
down there.
arrow key.
Yeah.
Greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be to have received fellowship in Counseling Psychology Division. The work I'm talking about today, I've been working on for the last 35 years or so. So in the next 10 hours, 10 minutes. I would like to give you, shall we say, a brief overview and highlight. The title of my brief presentation is Complexifying Career Assessment, Integrating Interest, Ability, and Personality. And my first systematic statement of this was a book published in 1991, and we seem to be sticking with the number 10, but my revised version of the book is about 10 years overdue now, but any day now it'll be finished. But in it, I made the points and illustrated the ideas that in doing career assessment, that it is important to assess across multiple domains and to assess complexly, and that too much of what was going on in the name of career assessment was heavy in certain areas and light in others, and particularly that abilities other than efforts at self-assessment of abilities were lacking, and also more complex understanding of personality. So I want to just briefly, and it will be briefly, talk about how, just to illustrate really with this presentation, how these areas really have more richness and complexity than what we sometimes give them credit for. And in this case we could talk about other domains, but the three with which I've been especially involved are occupational interest, well known to counseling psychologists, work-related personality dimensions, and work-related abilities. Start first with interest. All of us are familiar probably with Holland's model of interest, which RIASEC model, which has had enormous staying power. John Holland actually wrote the introduction to the career assessment book I showed you a minute ago. And we have seen some advancement in the measurement of interest, but Holland's model has, as I say, enormous staying power, particularly the advancements with the ONET and the empirical measurement of average interest profiles across a much greater number of occupations is a major achievement. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about first is the implications of within career profile variability. And I'm going to illustrate this with the following example. Here is a profile of the candidates for city manager position for a major American city, which if I told you the name, which I won't, you'd know what it is. All of the finalists were already practicing folks in the area of city management. They're already city managers of similar sized cities, et cetera. And when you look at the Holland profile for this group of candidates, it came out looking like what we would expect the average profile to be for that type of occupation, which is enterprising, social, and conventional as the top three endorsed codes. But when we look at the individual level, there was actually only one of the candidates who actually matched that profile, and that was candidate F, whose profile you see here. Candidate D, the one on the left there, was somebody who was already a city manager, was actually in trouble in his city, loved all the elements of roads and sewage and all that, not so good perhaps at the social and aspects of the role. In the case, and so the major point is there's much more meat on those bones than simply what is looked at in an average profile. And that when you're assessing at the individual level, where the task arguably in career assessment is the individual is given and the occupation is not, so all occupations theoretically could be a match for that person, is to figure out what these results are really saying. In the case of abilities, I think we do have to make a special case of general intelligence, because if we had to measure one thing, that would be the best, arguably the best thing to measure. But the reality is we don't have to measure just one thing, and I argue we should not be measuring just one thing. Thus, for example, if we break this down looking at the Holland interest models, what are the analogous ability types? In the realistic area, we have mechanical ability. Spatial ability has emerged as a very important variable in both realistic and some investigative type occupations. In the artistic areas, the abilities are domain specific, and so if we really want to measure abilities, we have to differentiate between visual arts, music, creative writing, and the like, and so on down the way for social, enterprising, and conventional. When we look, I argue then, if the task is to help assess people, to identify what they are best suited for, need to assess widely, and I will suggest that self-assessment of abilities is not a sufficient basis on which to draw conclusions about what one is best suited for on the ability side. We move then to personality, and Even back when I wrote the initial book on career assessment, I was using the 5-factor model, and we can make suggestions that the so-called normal measures of personality are relevant in terms of doing career assessment. But I would also argue that there are others that are not included in the Big Five, and the Big Five sometimes measure at too high a level. Thus, need for achievements, dominance, masculinity, femininity, integrity are all areas that have been suggested by the literature to be ones that add important variance. Now, putting this all together, in the rapid speed version of this, we could then say a profile of people in realistic, if we look at what I call the inner domain area, would have a profile across interests, abilities, and personality, and that we could do that in each of these areas, and then to look at a example that what is the modal profile of a successful business executive. This would be an example of this. We would expect on average that the profile might be something on the interest side like ESC, where we discussed with the city manager, that on the ability side we would expect a profile of high average or above intelligence, mechanical average and relatively low on spatial, low on creative abilities, moderately high social intelligence, and what is called managerial intelligence, average perceptual speed and accuracy. And on the personality side, business managers as a whole do not tend to be particularly open. They tend to be mildly inflexible, very high on conscientiousness, more likely to be extroverted than introverted, moderately high on agreeableness, and low on neuroticism, which means either that they are or that they're good at presenting themselves that way, which is an issue when we are dealing with folks. How are we doing on time? A little bit left? So, conclusions. One, I suggest in my work that we have insufficiently addressed the issues of intra domain variability, and that the variability within a domain will tell us important things about the goodness of fit both to a person within an occupation or within a subtype of an occupation. Secondly, I argue, and I think the literature is supportive, that except for general intelligence and self-ratings of abilities, we have neglected abilities in career assessment and counseling measurement. I would suggest in particular there is a hefty literature now on the relevance of spatial ability, both for STEM occupations and for visual arts. We have much more data now about the relevance of social abilities in both the social and enterprising type occupations, and that mechanical abilities and non-verbal reasoning abilities in the areas like realistic are relevant. Thirdly, I contend that the Big Five personality measurement is a good start, but it is insufficient. That is, we need more variables in terms of looking at personality. And that most importantly, we need to focus more on what is much harder to measure, which is inter-domain research, where we look at people across domains and more complexly within domains. And in my last 3 seconds, I will say to you, thank you.